Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. I am Bryant Sharifi, graduate student at Holy Names University, and I am a student in applied sport and performance psychology. I'm going to be doing a presentation for the assessment course on the athlete burnout questionnaire, and this is a reference for you to use at any point when you want to evaluate burnout in your athletes. Make sure when you're evaluating burnout that you triangulate, make sure you observe the athlete in some type of capacity, and when you interview, things that come up that also validate burnout are also present after administering the test or while you do the test and observation. So let's get started, shall we? So let's define burnout. First off, the definition, and it's very hard to define as a construct, kind of like mental toughness. There's differing opinions on the matter. However, it is more of an experience, being from low to high. You're not burnt out or not, you're experiencing some type of burnout symptoms. So make sure that that is understood before we go into things. You're not trying to see if someone is burnt out or they're just not burnt out at all. It's an experience. It could be somewhat burnt out or very burnt out. The early research was in the 1970s by Fredenberger and Masloch. I'll be talking a little more about Masloch because she created the MBI inventory. So that is the Masloch Burnout Inventory is what it stands for. And she created that. She did a lot of research on that when it came to social workers. She wanted to see how to measure that in that population, since they're more frequently burnt out as far as their experiences. And she came up with kind of three areas that she defined constructs or subscales that really define burnout. And those were emotional exhaustion, which she later changed to emotional and physical exhaustion, depersonalization, which is just not being connected to people, which she later changed to cynicism so she can make the inventory more widespread to the corporate world. And last but not least is not feeling as if you're achieving as much. And you'll see that at the bottom here, the athlete burnout questionnaire, which Radicki and Smith developed from a lot of early research from Masloch, is very similar in the three subscales. There is emotional physical exhaustion, reduced sense of accomplishment, which I just mentioned. And instead of cynicism or depersonalization, they changed it to devaluation of the sport. Also, another way to define burnout, where more people kind of have more agreed consensus upon the definition, is not meeting one's expectations after putting a lot of effort or work into a goal or an experience of some kind. So as you can imagine with athletes, that happens very often. They put a lot of time and years and effort into accomplishing certain things, and when those accomplishments aren't met or their experience wasn't what they thought it was going to be, that can lead to burnout with those three subscales. So what are the purpose and the benefits of the athlete burnout questionnaire? So for one, it's designed to measure burnout. And it's designed to measure burnout in competitive athletes. So that was originally what it was intended for. I'll get into the population in the next slide. Again, there's three subscales. It's an item and response format, so it's very easy to administer. It takes 5 minutes or less, 15 questions, 5 questions per subscale. As far as scoring, actually, I'll go into that in a second as well. So population best served. It is best served for youth and collegiate athletes because that's what it was intended for. Although it has been used across many different populations in different sports and even teams, and it's been validated and reliable for different populations. As you can imagine, youth athletes are a lot of times more burnt out, and so are college athletes given their demands, or early specialization for youth athletes. They're also trying to figure out their identities. And as they begin to form their identities, they start to want to do different things, and it can lead playing one particular sport can lead to more symptoms of burnout. And for college athletes who have to juggle so many different responsibilities, work, school, and sport. And actually, that's what I want to do. Kind of my work here at Holy Names, my thesis or my project is on burnout in collegiate athletes. Given that I'm a graduate assistant in strength and conditioning, I kind of want to see the experiences of my student athletes and how they're experiencing burnout symptoms, and then maybe do some intervention to see if it's improving. Getting on a tangent here, let's continue. So identification for appropriate uses. This is very important, and this kind of ties into a lot of takeaways here. Burnout is very similar, has similar associations to a lot of other issues an athlete may experience. For example, they're not recovering well, they're overtraining, stress, they're not coping with stress very well, lack of motivation. Those things can all contribute to burnout. So it's important to kind of pinpoint what's the main cause. That's why giving further assessments, making sure you do a very thorough interview and observation is very important as well when you get into the intervention component of this. And also, it could be very clinical, right? Their symptoms could be very clinical in nature. So it's important to distinguish between depression or clinical anxiety, if that could be the case, to refer out. So correlation with similar variables of burnout, as I was mentioning, it's very similar. Radicki and Smith did some research on this, and they found that amotivation, stress, and trait anxiety are also correlated to burnout and the results of their tests when someone tests for burnout or experiences burnout. Stress, motivation, lack of confidence, like commitment, those are all connected. So it's important, again, give various tests, assessments. So how is it administered? You give a set of directions that are very clear. The one thing I would say, one caveat is, it does say thoughts and feelings about these items in the instructions, but however, when you take the actual assessment, each specific question says your feelings about each of the questions rather than thoughts and feelings. So just be clear on that. The other thing is, this is kind of my personal opinion, having been an athlete and a student athlete in college, make sure to talk about all components of their sport, not just their training. It could be film, it could be travel time, everything. So be really clear on that. And Radicki and Smith in their manual, which I highly recommend if you're interested in burnout, purchase their manual, which kind of goes over everything about administering the exam. They mentioned do not say that this is a assessment on burnout, because there's a bias there. Like, no one wants to be, there's a social desirability, I should say. No one wants to be burnt out, especially in certain cultures and sports. You don't want to say that. So it's more of a sport experience questionnaire is how they frame it, which I like. So that way you don't get that social desirability, and you just want to get the most honest feedback as you can, or responses. All right, so the actual questionnaire, here it is. It's 15 questions, as you can see. Again, each of there's 5 questions per subscale. Very easy on a 5-point Likert scale. So scoring, you add up the 5 questions that have to do with mental, physical exhaustion, and you divide that by 5, and you do the same for reduced sense of accomplishment and sport evaluation. So for example, if the athlete scores a 5, which means very often, almost always, they feel, tired in their sport for the physical, emotional exhaustion, and the other 4 questions are also 5, that would be a 25. 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5, that's 25, divided by 5. Now you give them a score of a 5 on mental and physical exhaustion. Now that would be very severely burnt out if that was the case. So anywhere really above a 2.5 is considered burnt out. Even a 2 is burnt out. 3 is moderate to high burnout. And again, as you keep going up closer to a 5, the athlete is experiencing more and more burnout. So going into the reliability and validity, it has shown pretty good validity and reliability across multiple research articles that I discovered. Specifically, Radake and Smith, of course, in their manual showed the validity and reliability. And what's interesting, across different languages, they allow you to, with permission, change the language. It's been validated across different cultures. In my critique paper, I found articles of the questionnaire being validated in Mexico, Spain, France, Brazil. There's multiple countries. And even when you change a couple questions to kind of fit the needs of certain sports or cultures, it's been still shown to be validated and reliable in measuring burnout. So what are some limitations, some drawbacks of the ABQ? As you can see here, again, desirability bias. Of course, the athletes, don't want to show in certain sports, for example, like boxing, that's something I used to do. You don't want to say you're tired. It's just part of the culture. You just got to push through. So that could be something there. Further factors, this is really important, play a role in burnout. And there, again, the recovery, the stress, coping, could be motivation. It could be a lot of things, commitment that play into burnout. So make sure to do a thorough assessment. And if you suspect other areas that they need, that may be the issue, make sure to assess those as well. Make sure to triangulate as well, as I mentioned here. And make sure understand all elements of their life, not just their sport. Because sport could be one area of their life that's contributing to the burnout, but they could have other personal things going on, like their job or other stresses in their life that are contributing to burnout. And the ABQ doesn't account for that. So techniques and possible intervention. I have several slides here on this. So some of the research, which I thought was interesting and kind of makes sense, is emotional and physical exhaustion. This was on early research on Maslow. And Radake and Smith have done some of this too, on kind of stress coping. But mental physical exhaustion a lot of times come first. And that kind of leads more to the devaluation of sport. And then reduced sense of accomplishment is kind of independent of the two and kind of happens alongside the other two. So it's important to start early on, figuring out if mental and physical exhaustion is indeed the case and they score high on that, start to address those matters and figure out what's causing that and start with some interventions there. Could be stress management, could be, sport life balance, could be a lot of things like that could help them, have a better relationship with their sport. It could be unilateral identity, research by Coakley in 1992 on that is really interesting, where the athletes start to develop a very strong identity to the sport, but kind of doesn't develop other identities that they maybe long for, and now they get burnt out because of that, because they kind of have one singular identity. So what I'm really trying to say here too is that if an athlete scores a 3.5 on mental physical exhaustion and a 3.5 on sport evaluation, start to figure out, not to say you can't do interventions for both, but maybe focus on mental physical exhaustion, because that might help with the way they see and devalue their sport. And I'm going into techniques and interventions for each of the 3 subscales here now a little further. So again, for mental physical exhaustion, emotional physical exhaustion, it could be lack of self-care. So interventions with self-care could be vital here. Like sleep. I know a lot of student athletes in the college level, I know I didn't get adequate sleep, and that contributed to, me not feeling the best self when I was a student athlete. The other thing could be overtraining. Again, this could be something where you work with teams and coaches, administrators on how much time the athlete spent on their sport, and especially on the physical demands, making sure you kind of balance out all the needs of recovery that are important. Inability to cope with stress. It's, the demands are greater than the resources that one has to cope with the stress. Sport is stressful. And then again, of course, athletes have a lot more than just sports in their life that lead to stress. And then early specialization, that could be a reason for the emotional physical exhaustion as well. So if they have other interests, make sure to diversify their interest and play other sports that could help them not feel so attached and exhausted by that one particular sport. So devaluation, cognitive evaluation theory. So they begin to devalue their sport. It may be they're not focusing on controllables. So helping them kind of associate the right motivational principles there. The other thing could be approach versus avoidance goals. Maybe they've been, just avoiding failure, and that's causing them to not value what they do. Help them approach their goals. Help them with task mastery. Improve their skills and get competent there, which leads to reduced sense of accomplishment. I think this is really interesting here, and I think education for coaches is vital in this place, and for athletes and parents for that matter, is really teaching them the fact that athletes need to focus on, the intrinsic motivators, mastery of the sport, not so much outcome goals, not so much concerned with that. The basic needs theory. There's a lot of research on this when it comes to preventing burnout and improving burnout, and it makes sense. Autonomy, giving athletes autonomy, letting them control their path a little bit more, making sure that they're gaining competence always. They're feeling like they're achieving. This will help, obviously, with reducing that reduced sense of accomplishment. It will help increase sense of accomplishment, I should say, if they're gaining more competence. And then relatedness, creating that community, creating that atmosphere where it's fun. Don't forget, to incorporate fun. So integration and pride practice, I think education is really important. And when you're in your applied practice, I think this is something where you could do a lot of seminars on preventing it in the first place, because I think that's more important than anything. It's not just intervention, but prevention of burnout. And then create interventions based on the ABQ responses. So there could be a way to, within the 3 subscales, to create certain intervention types as the ones I mentioned, to help athletes pre and post. Also, in applied practice, just figuring out, stress management, self-care, athletic identity. There's a lot here that you can work with an athlete, depending on what the issue is. There's going to be a lot of trial and error. I don't think there's a silver bullet for burnout, and it's usually a combination of factors. Again, but it's important to try to pinpoint what the main issue is at hand. And then to conclude, triangulate. Like I said earlier, make sure you observe, make sure you do a thorough interview, and the ABQ. Because the ABQ, they might not show that they're burnt out, but you may see them feel irritable, look tired, look exhausted, and they may be telling you things in the interview that are that of burnout. Make sure to follow up with other screens to make sure that there isn't anything else other than not just burnout, but anxiety and stress and commitment issues and things like that. And remember that intervention is going to have to be very comprehensive, and there's no silver bullet, like I just mentioned. Thank you for your time. Please reach out. My email is bryant_sharifi@hnu.edu, or my HNU work email is sharifi@hnu.edu. A little easier to remember. Happy to answer any questions on burnout. I really love this subject matter. Very interesting to me. Shoot me some questions. Shoot me an email, and I'll be seeing everyone soon. Thank you.